Welcome back to another episode of Falcons Central Radio on the Pro Football Central Radio Network. I'm Aaron Freeman. I'm joined by my good friend Scott Karasik. He's a writer for Bleacher Report, also covers the draft for ProFootballSpot.com. I write for FalcFans.com, the site I created many, many years ago and don't make any money off of. But that's another conversation for another day. Today's show is big news, everyone. Lots of stuff to talk about. First and foremost, we got to talk about Tim Tebow. No, I'm just kidding. We are recording this episode on the Tuesday night that the NFL released the 2015 schedule. So we will be talking about the Falcons 2015 schedule. We'll be breaking it down, giving you guys our thoughts on how many games the Falcons will win, because that's all anybody cares about. Of course, we will be talking about the draft as usual, because we are, 9 days and counting from the draft. So we will get a little bit into that. And then, of course, as usual, we will be answering your mailbag questions. So, Scott, first thoughts on the Falcons schedule.
I like how there's not a lot of huge road trips. Like, you've got the one road trip at the beginning where you go to New York, you go to Dallas, which isn't that bad. Then you've got a short one where it's New Orleans and Tennessee. Again, not that bad. Then you've got the 49ers, but it's just the 49ers. Then you get the bye week after going cross country, which is awesome. And then you've got a span where you're traveling a total of 2,100 miles in 7 weeks. And one of those is the 900-mile trip to Tampa Bay, which isn't bad at all.
Yeah.
So, like, there and back. These are round-trip numbers. So, overall, total travel for the Falcons schedule this year, it's about 12,000 miles. For comparison, last year was about 18 to 19,000 miles without including the London trip. There's a lot more travel, a lot farther trips. You know, they were playing what? Was that both North? It was both North teams. So there was a lot of trips to Minnesota and New York and, you know, Cincinnati, and then I think it was Buffalo maybe.
Yeah. But, was Toronto last year or the year before? I can't remember.
Toronto the year before, but still.
Okay.
The last 2 years of scheduling was horrible for Atlanta. Horrible.
Yeah, I look at this road schedule and I'm like, this is practically a cakewalk. You know, when your toughest game is the Saints, I'm not a big believer in the Giants and Cowboys. I know that, the NFC East gets a lot of hype, but I think those are two mediocre teams that are vastly, vastly overrated. So I'm not too concerned about those games. But yeah, it's like the Saints on, that short week against the Saints on the road is your toughest road game, and pretty much everybody else is, warm weather, dome. Like the Falcons basically will be playing in like 70 degrees from November on. So it's just like great, Matt Ryan should be putting up great numbers at the end of the year.
Their coldest game will be week 9 in Santa Clara, California, when it's like 55, 50 degrees around there. If you've never been to San Francisco area, the Bay Area in November, go, because you'll be like, man, this is great. This is light hoodie weather.
Yeah, it's chilly, but it's not like cold.
No, it's just put on a nice hoodie and you're good.
Yeah, I mean, like you look at the toughest opponents the Falcons have to face this year, pretty much all of them are at home. And, I'm looking at it, and it's not like, the Colts are probably the toughest team they have to face, probably followed by the Eagles. I'd probably throw the Vikings up there. I seem to be higher on the Vikings than a lot of people. But it's like those three teams, but they're all at home. And, the Falcons basically, they can win 2 out of those 3 games. They're golden. Even if they probably win 1 out of those 3 games, they're still golden. So it's the schedule. People have been talking about it's an easy schedule, and we know when you base strength of schedule off the previous season's records, those are pretty much useless. But, last year the Colts had the easiest schedule going into the season. By year's end, the Cowboys wound up with it. But the Colts still ended up with like the 7th or 8th easiest schedule. So by and large, the Falcons should be on the lower end of the scale when all is said and done, when you tally their wins at the end of the year. So I think this is a perfect year for the sort of bounce back playoff run. And I know people probably are going crazy thinking, oh, Aaron, the Mr. Negative Nancy over there, saying the Falcons will make the playoffs. Yeah, I think they will. So,
I mean, when you look at the schedule, the first 6 games look like they're the toughest. Like, it wouldn't shock me to see Atlanta go 3-3 or 2-4 through the first 6. But then you go to Tennessee, you go to Tampa with a rookie quarterback, you get the falling apart 49ers. I mean, that right there looks like the easiest part of the schedule. Then you got a bye. Then you get the Colts, who are probably going to be the hardest opponent all season, and the Vikings, who are going to be tough. And then after that, it's NFC South, which always plays tough, but, it's familiar opponent.
Yeah.
And then you close the season with the Saints at home. Atlanta, if they play well, if they have a good draft, obviously throwing ifs out there, but Atlanta could very well be something like 11-4 going into that final game.
Yeah, I agree.
Looking at the schedule. And that would be pretty solid. Because you got to think, you got the 5 going into that Saints game, you've got the 5 division games, which I'm assuming they'll go 3-2 or 4-1 in. You've got the NFC South, which I think they go, or NFC East, which I think they go 3-1 against. So there's 3 of your losses, and then I think they'll lose to the Colts. Other than that, I think every other game is beatable.
Yeah.
I think you got the Tennessee Titans, the Jacksonville Jaguars, the Texans, Washington. Like, I'm not talking about world beaters here. And if Atlanta just does really well, they might start the season 4-1 going into that Saints game, which I know we'd all love it. I don't think they beat the Cowboys in Dallas.
Yeah, I think probably the most conservative way you can see the season starting is if they lose to the Eagles, because Chip Kelly throws something, out of his butt at the Falcons that they're not prepared for. You probably split the Giants, Cowboys, so you probably lose one of those games. I think if you buy into the Texans defense, and if Clowney and Watt and all those guys and Will Fork are, being the guys that we've known them to be or think they can be, then that's going to be a tough matchup at home against that defense, especially if our offensive line hasn't quite gelled quite yet. So, but I think you look at that, I'm not worried at all about the Redskins. So I think, you going into that Saints game, probably not absolute worst case scenario, but realistic worst case scenario, you're looking at 2-3, 2-4 if you think the short week against the Saints. And then you can start to pad a couple of wins and get closer back to 500 as we get to the bye. Then if they, trip up against the Colts and Vikings, they still have those last, 5 games are really set up for them to basically just run the table. So I think, maybe if I'm comparing this to a season, the season in the past I've compared it to is 2004. But I'm thinking maybe worst case scenario, you're looking at it like a 97 season, where I think the Falcons started like 2-6 and then finished the season 6-2 or something like that. I can't remember off the top of my head. So, I mean, that's basically
started at 2-7 before the bye, and then finished like 6-1.
Okay. Yeah. So it was basically they struggled with Dan Reeves early trying to gel, and then by the year's end they gelled. And I think I think that's the worst case scenario if you're going to be super pessimistic about the Falcons. They struggle early, they lose a bunch of close games, and then by year's end everything's clicking and they beat up a bunch of bad teams. So, but I think probably a more realistic situation is that they start stronger than people were probably going to predict them to. and they do get that stretch run. And so the only thing you're really worried about is maybe a lag in the middle. And I'm looking at that 49ers road trip and that Colts Vikings 2 games. I don't think the 49ers are that great of a team, but going out to the West Coast is always a tough road trip, regardless of who you're playing. So that worries me a little bit. And the Colts and the Vikings, I think, are arguably, other than the Eagles, the 2 best teams you face on your schedule. So those could easily be home losses. But other than that, I really think the schedule sets up pretty well for the Falcons.
In terms of like recent schedules and how it's structured a lot like 2011's. Your tough road trips are early: Chicago, Seattle, Detroit, Indy, and then after that, you've got 7 of your last. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The last 8 games for Atlanta that year were home games: Carolina, New Orleans, and Houston.
Yeah, you're right.
So, and they went 5-3 the second half of that year, and 2 of the games were 1-score games where they lost to Houston and New Orleans.
Yeah. Matt Ryan had hit one of them deep shots early in that Houston game. Probably would have won that game, but hey.
And honestly, the Falcons team could have won 3 more games that year than they did. They were 10-6, but 3 of the games were close that they lost on the last drive because the defense fell apart. So if this defense gets put together and does what it's supposed to do, they could be a really damn good team.
Yeah. I'm looking at some of these matchups, and none of these offenses, the Eagles, Colts, Vikings can be a little scary if their offensive line isn't terrible. Obviously, the Saints have historically been good, but other than that, you're not looking at a whole bunch of offenses that are really going to, I guess the Cowboys maybe, if their running game is what it was, but you're not looking at a whole bunch of offenses that are going to score 40 points against the Falcons defense. So it's really setting up for the Falcons defense to basically, if they're just mediocre, which I think is probably a realistic expectation, then I think they're going to be able to keep the Falcons in games and allow the offense to sort of win the game, which is basically what this team has been since we drafted Matt Ryan. Whether it was Matt Ryan or Michael Turner, it was basically somebody on the offense stepping up and taking care of business in the fourth quarter. So I think that's what this team is going to be again in 2015.
I'd agree. I really would. I mean, it's a good team, and you're being optimistic, talking to the optimist here, and I'm just like, wow, this schedule looks really good. I'm enjoying it. I'm not really worried about this. Couple of fun stats because I did the calculations on it earlier. The first road trip for the Falcons is 33.24 miles. The 49ers trip alone is going to be 48.76, but the other 2 road trips, the Saints and Titans and the Buccaneers, Jaguars, Panthers, those 5 games combined for about what that first Giants-Cowboys game would be, and they're less than what the 49ers trip is going to be. So the Falcons don't have to travel as much this year.
Yeah.
I mean, they do it spurts.
And they're not facing anybody good on the road, so it's beautiful.
I think they beat the Giants. I think the one team they lose to is the Cowboys. And then, they could legitimately go 6-2, 7-1 on the road this year.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Yeah, they're gonna, they're not gonna go 8-0. No one goes 8-0 in a row. So they're gonna trip up against somebody. And I probably put the odds higher that's an NFC South team more than the Cowboys. I don't think the Cowboys are gonna be good this year. I really think we're looking at, other than unless you're gonna believe that the Saints or the Panthers are gonna be decent again, I think the best team that they're gonna face on the road is either the Cowboys or the 49ers. And they're know that neither of those teams are going to finish above 7-9. So, that's basically what you're looking at. You're looking at the Falcons playing a bunch of 7-9 teams. And I think most Falcon fans will probably agree that the Saints and Panthers are basically 7-9 teams that, get to pad a couple of extra wins against the Bucks, So,
yeah.
It's pretty.
Well, and a lot of people are acting like a lot of analysts are acting like the Buccaneers are going to be the next great team because Lovie Smith did so well in Chicago. Lovie Smith's an idiot.
I'm not gonna lie, Scott. I bought into that hype too. Because I was like, well, Lovey's like Mike Smith. They always seem to have winning seasons in Chicago, even though you look at that team, you're like, how are they doing that?
They learned how to not lose. That's how it works.
Yeah.
And Tampa Bay hasn't not lost yet. They still beat themselves. They still shoot themselves in the foot. And it's not going to change just because they get Jameis Winston. He's going to have to learn how to lose the same way Cam Newton learned how to lose his first couple of years.
Yeah. Yeah. So, Scott, do you have, I know it's April, and I know basically any final record predictions made, on April 21st should be taken with a grain of salt, but you're looking at the schedule, what does your gut tell you that the Falcons are going to finish this year?
I mean, my gut, because I'm a homer, says 13-3, but that's because I'm a homer. No, realistically, I think they're a 10-6, 11-5 team.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I feel 11-5, but I always usually try to, because I'm a pessimistic bastard, I always end up taking a win away because there's always something that, shocks you. But so I'll say 10-6, but it feels like 11-5.
That's my thoughts. It does feel like 11-5. It feels like the year when Mike Smith got hired, when you're like, oh, who the hell is this? Only difference is this coach is interesting and fires people up. And I feel like you're going to lose a couple games early on because the team hasn't gelled yet. And I think the Cowboys are one of those games. And that's why I keep singling them out. I do think they beat the Eagles at home. I do think they beat the Texans at home. I do think they beat Washington at home. I think they drop one or two of the division games at home, and I think they drop 2 or 3 games on the road. So,
okay, I'm not worried at all about the Cowboys. The only thing that worries me about the Cowboys is Greg Hardy, and so if he gets that 4-game suspension, then I'm not going to be worried at all about the Cowboys. Their defense is terrible. So I'm looking forward to Julio Jones lighting up their defense. What was that, Scott? I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
He only needs a 3-game suspension.
Yeah, I know. I'm just saying. I'm thinking I've heard he'll get 4. So gravy, I guess. But whatever.
Yeah, if they don't have to face Greg Hardy, then. And the thing is, I'm not worried about edge rushers with Matthews going into his second year and Schrader looking like he did. Schrader's worst game was against Charles Johnson after Charles Johnson had some sort of ridiculous month. I've never seen him play like he did that month.
Yeah. I'm always worried about Greg Hardy, though, because he seems to always play well against the Falcons.
It's because he hates the Falcons.
Yeah, I know. That's why I'm always worried about him.
He was never going to sign with Atlanta, period. 1, because they didn't want him, but 2, because he hates the Falcons.
Yeah, absolutely, man. All right, Scott, you got any other thoughts on the schedule before we start talking about the draft?
Yeah, I like how there's only 2 primetime games. The 1 Monday night game and then the 1 Thursday night game. Although I do think the Saints game in Week 17 ends up getting flexed. But other than that, it's nice to see.
Keep an eye on that Week 11 and Week 12 Colts Vikings game. I'll say that.
I think those are 4 o'clock games, though.
Are they? I think they're 1 o'clocks.
Are they?
I think so. I thought all of our home games were 1 o'clocks.
All right, so – oh, yeah, they are. There's a lot of Sunday 1 o'clock games this year. That is nice. That means the team gets into a rhythm. 4 straight, 2 straight, and then all of the last 7 games. There's the 4 o'clock in San Francisco, which is the 1 o'clock game out there anyway. And then you got the Thursday night game, which sucks, and the Monday night game, which is the early Monday night game.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. It's gonna be good, man. It's gonna be fun. You said you only like that they had two. Does that mean that you're happy they only had two? Like you didn't want more, or you feel
no,
like
I don't like primetime games. They're a pain in the butt. And just because I'm selfish and just because I hate staying up till 3 a.m. writing articles on the after game, I enjoy when they get to have these 1 o'clock games so I can watch the 4 o'clock games while I'm writing about the 1 o'clock game. It makes me very happy.
I know where you're coming from, Scott. So yeah, I agree with you on that. It's Monday night's a killer, especially you got to wake up early Tuesday for work. It sucks.
The good thing is I'm off on Tuesdays, so I'd be fine if there were like 6 Monday night games. But the Thursday night games suck because Fridays are big days in the car business, and having to go in on 4 hours of sleep is not fun.
Okay, all right. I know where you're feeling. That's how I am on Tuesdays. So yeah, but yeah, we'll see what happens. I do think we'll probably get a couple of flex games because obviously we think the Falcons will be good this year. So yeah, we'll see what happens.
Hopefully some playoff games.
Yeah. Any other thoughts on the schedule, Scott?
Nope.
All right. Let's talk about the draft. So,
what you want to know?
All right. We had some recent visits, Scott, but I know you usually have something that you want to rant about. So I'll give you the opportunity to, if something has been bothering you involving the draft. I think last week was it Todd Gurley in the top 10? Was that last week's rant?
That was last week. This week is more, I don't know. There really isn't much. Just don't go back and find random crap from November about players when I was not done watching all of their film for the year. And it was like early November. And then retweet it and be like, oh, hey, he still thinks this. Not anywhere close. Like I said, Shane Ray was a top 15 guy back in November. But that was before Dante Fowler and Vic Beasley balled out the last couple of months.
Okay. All right. Well, the Falcons had a whole bunch of visits last week. They basically went across the country and basically did their whole on-campus visits all across California, Washington, et cetera, Missouri. And they brought in a couple players yesterday and today into Georgia. Not anybody who's a first-round sort of pick. More guys that they seem to be looking at maybe day 2, maybe day 3. Do any of these guys stand out? And I'll name them shortly. The running backs were David Johnson and Tevin Coleman. Wide receivers, Mario Alford, Jamison Crowder, Justin Hardy, which is unconfirmed, but we'll, for the sake of argument, we'll assume that he did visit. And the pass rusher was Davis Tull. And later this week, they have my guy from Pitt, TJ Clemmings, who I believe Scott has in his top 10 players board, or did at one point in time.
No, I do. He's my number 8 player.
I thought so. And we also have the DB from Miami of Ohio, because people are kind of mixed on where he'll play corner or safety. Quentin Rollins, he's also set to visit this week. So any of those guys you're like, I want that guy in the Falcons, or is any of those guys like, nah, I'll pass?
I think that Davis Tull would be an amazing fit in the mid-rounds, like a 4th-round pick, ridiculous athlete. As my Seahawks fan friends that I've been talking with a lot lately would say, he's sparked out of his mind. He jumps off the ball, great first step, great hand usage. Needs a lot of work in the run game, but if he could develop into a decent run stuffer, he could be a fun player as a Leo. Justin Hardy, Jamison Crowder, Mario Alford, all those guys would be perfect fits for a slot receiver, but I don't see a single one of them being a great outside receiver although Alford burns people when he's outside. Fast as hell.
Okay.
And then Tevin Coleman and David Johnson are just your ideal zone blocking backs. David Johnson would be about a 4th round pick. And then Tevin, you're probably thinking late 2nd, early 3rd if you trade up a little bit.
Okay. Yeah, that's about where I think Coleman probably goes in the 3rd just because of the knee. But probably if he was healthy, he'd probably be a 2nd round pick because teams love those fast running backs.
Now, when it comes to Clemmings, love Clemmings as a right tackle in the zone scheme. If you're going to take Clemmings, that means you're moving Schrader to left guard because it doesn't make sense to have anyone else really there. When it comes to Quentin Rollins, I think his best fit's free safety.
Okay. All right. I don't disagree with you on the Rollins thing. I do think if the Falcons did take Clemmings, and I don't think they're looking at him at 8, and I don't think he'll last the 42. So, but I do think with Clemmings, I do think he's probably a better fit at guard than Schrader. I think the issue with Clemmings is he's a great athlete, but he's still sort of developing as a tackle. And I think if you're going to move him to another position other than right tackle, you might as well do it now. And as a guard, I think some of his issues that he has as a tackle, because he's very mechanical, even though he's a great athlete, he's very mechanical. I think you can sort of lessen those issues if you play him at guard and you just basically say, okay, TJ, do what you want to do and just maul that dude. And I think, he can do that. I think that would probably make him a better fit as a guard. But I agree with you on Rollins. I think the Falcons are probably looking at him more as a safety than a corner. But he does have the versatility to play both. So
now, a couple of these workouts that are here from last week: Leonard Williams, Owa Odighi, Shane Ray, Marcus Golden, Eric Kendricks, Shaq Thompson, Marcus Peters, and then a couple randos like Chad Hamilton, Chris Dunkley, and Akeem King. Hamilton, Dunkley, and King, if you're looking for undrafted free agent names, Atlanta does sign a lot of the visits that they bring in that are undrafted free agents. And a lot of their local day guys they'll bring in that are like, hey, we want you to come and play for us. We're not going to draft you, but if you're available, come see us. So I think that's what those are, recruiting pitches, really. Leonard Williams, that's kind of, if he's there, you have to do your due diligence. Owa Odighi's 2nd round pick. Shane Ray, Marcus Golden. Ray, honestly, should be a 2nd round pick, but he's probably going to go mid-1st, even though he shouldn't. He's probably going to. Marcus Golden's the 3rd round pick at the earliest for the Falcons. Kendricks, Thompson, those guys are 2nd round picks. Peters, if Atlanta goes corner in the 1st round and shocks the world, that's a name to look out for. But I don't think they're going to go corner in the 1st round. I think it's pass rusher or bust.
I agree. On those guys, I do think for the guys like Chad Hamilton and Dunkley, I don't know much about Akeem King, but I do know Dunkley was a returner at USF, I think. So I think there's a chance that the Falcons could take a flyer out of him in the 7th round. I do think Hamilton is sort of one of those fallback guys. If they don't get the guard that they want early in the draft, they just basically take a guy who's a good fit for the zone blocking scheme late and hope that he develops down the road, maybe 6th or 7th round. But that's only if they don't get the guard they want early. The other guys, I'm going to be interested. I know this doesn't really have anything to do with the Falcons, but I'm going to be interested where Kendricks and Thompson get drafted, because I have this feeling that one or both of those guys could go a lot higher than probably a lot of people are projecting them to go, like top 20 higher. I mean, so I've heard the Chargers really like Thompson. I feel like the Texans have to take an inside linebacker with their pick, since that's in my mind, their biggest need. So it wouldn't shock me if they took a guy like Kendricks there. So, it'll be interesting to see where those guys end up. They could fall to the 2nd round. but it doesn't feel like that's a high probability, at least in my mind. So if the Falcons want those guys, I think they'll either have to trade back from 8 or trade up from 42.
I agree with you there. Now, a couple names on guys that I've been working on. I've been doing the scouting reports for this basically today. Haloi Kakaha would be a fun pick in the mid-rounds. If you're looking for a rotational pass rusher, he is a beast, but he is a power rusher, so it's tough to slot where he's going to go. Think Shane Ray, but actually, or not Shane Ray. Think Michael Sam, but actually athletic.
Okay.
So someone who can get off the ball and attack and actually set the edge. I did Stephon Anthony today. He'd be a good fit at middle linebacker. If the Falcons wanted to upgrade from Warlow, Stephon Anthony would be one of the few guys in the draft to do it with. Him, Kendricks, and Thompson are the 3 guys that would be upgrades from Warlow in this draft. And don't mention me with Paul Dawson, because Paul Dawson's a mid-round pick at best. I'm not a fan of Paul Dawson.
That's fair. I like Paul Dawson, but I know there's no chance the Falcons are going to draft him. So
yeah, and his off-field is sketch. And then a couple of free safeties that I looked at that I think you would like. Josh Shaw would be a great safety in the Falcon scheme because, as Aaron says, he understands it up here. And then another one is Darrell Eskridge.
You've mentioned him before.
Eskridge is fun to watch. I finally got around to doing his report today. Went back and watched film just because he's fun to watch. There's such bad safety play in the NFL today that if you put Eskridge back there, he could be a top 10 safety his first year because of how bad the rest of the safeties in the NFL are. He's Thomas Day Cood without tackling and angle issues.
Okay, that's a pretty good safety.
It's a pretty decent safety.
Yeah.
He doesn't knock the ball loose, but he wraps up and he takes guys down decently. And I think he'd do well with Dan Quinn's tackling style, the rugby style tackling. And then Josh Shaw, I don't know what the hell happened to make him jump out of a window before his senior year.
Yeah.
But he would have been a first-round pick. He's so damn good. So damn good. If he's there in the 3rd round and the Falcons don't take him, they'd be stupid. Because you could put him at free safety. You could put him at free safety. You could put him at corner. You could put him at nickel. Put him on the field. He's going to do something good. And that looks like it's a mailbag question. So I think I just answered that. Mr. Mac Daddy Sr. asked, I don't know much about Shaw, and I've seen him mock to us several times. What are your thoughts? Perfect scheme fit. Put him on the field. He'll play corner or safety. You'll love him. You'll absolutely love him. And then another couple of safeties that I like. I mean, it's not a great safety class. That's the other problem. But I'd love to see Quentin Rollins at safety. I'd love to see Eric Rowe at safety. Demarius Randall, he's all right. He's not amazing, but he'll make the splash plays, and I don't like his run defense, but he'll make the splash plays you need. And then James Sample out of Louisville. He's better than the guy who got all the interceptions, Holloman. Because Holloman can't tackle.
Okay. Interesting, Scott. Yes, it's interesting. I saw a video someone did on Randall because Randall's getting a lot of pub because Mike Mayock moved him to the #1 safety on his top 5 board. Basically, as anybody knows, anything Mike Mayock does makes headlines across the internet. I like Randall. He does have some flaws, but I do see him being successful in the Quinn defense as that single high safety. Because I think you can iron out some of his flaws and mask some of his run defense issues. Earl Thomas was not a great run defender coming out of Texas. And obviously Earl Thomas was elite ball skills, elite instincts, elite range. And Randall isn't that sort of guy, but I do think he does have the upside, at least, as a center fielder to sort of mask the fact that he's a horrible, horrible tackler. Think Jarris Bird, but not crappy.
But not crappy.
Yeah. Like, you know how Jarris Bird was great before he went to New Orleans last year? Like, somewhere in between Buffalo Jarris Bird and New Orleans Jarris Bird. Like, more Buffalo.
He was awful because he got hurt, or his back got hurt. He had a disc slip or something, and he had a back surgery. And remember when I said there's no such thing as a simple back surgery?
I remember that.
Well, there's no such thing as a simple back surgery. He showed effects of it all year. And again, I mean, I hate to say to Saints fans, I told you so, but I friggin' told you so.
Yeah. There was a time where we were very jealous of that move, Falcon fans. But
and then once I found out that there was a back surgery going on, I wasn't jealous of it at all, and I thought it looked bad.
Yeah. Kudos to the Saints for spending all of that money and then being like, crap, a year later, to the point where they basically, hey, let's cut all these guys on our offense. Or trade all these guys on our offense.
I just, yeah, screw it. It's the Saints don't know how to work the cap.
Good job, Saints. Great job, Mickey Loomis. You make the Falcons playoff run possible. Appreciate it. Because now we don't have to deal with Jimmy Graham.
And the thing is, the Saints don't have this amazing, such homers. The Saints don't have this amazing talent base to work from. It's an average team right now. They'll have a draft, which will bring it up a little bit. But Loomis isn't a great drafter. And then they've got Jeff Ireland there running their draft. So that'll be fun for everybody.
Yep. Yeah, you're right. Best Falcons GM in the NFC South, Mickey Loomis. Thanks for the Jimmy Graham trade. We really enjoyed that. You just add like 2 wins to the Falcons win total this year just by making that move, Mickey Loomis. So we appreciate that.
And the Falcons didn't have to do anything to get it. They weren't like, oh, hey, Saints, please trade Jimmy Graham. We don't want to see him. The Saints voluntarily did that. Like, probably their best player on the entire roster was Jimmy Graham. And nope, gone.
Yeah. Now we don't have to see Brooks Reed covering him, so I'm looking forward to that.
Like, ridiculous.
Yeah. Okay, let's veer back to the draft. I'm curious, Scott. I don't know if you've heard anything, but I've been hearing some stuff about Diggy's hip issues, and I'm wondering if that's going to make him fall in the draft. If teams are going to be like, we're a little worried about those hips. Maybe he could be a possible value on the 3rd or 4th round.
If Diggy's there in the 3rd round and Atlanta doesn't take him, I would be shocked. Because if you want a guy who's a perfect fit at that strong side defensive end role, it's Diggy. Great interior move, moves to 3-tech on 3rd downs. You bring in either a pure pass rusher or slide down Brooks Reed, you're going to have a lot of fun with Diggy. a lot of fun to dig.
Scott, I thought you had an interesting take on Twitter. I saw you tweet earlier this week that you thought Marcus Golden was better than Shane Ray. And I thought that was interesting because back in like the fall, I thought the same thing, but I didn't say it because everybody was saying that Shane Ray is this great prospect. So I was just assuming, okay, clearly I haven't seen enough to know, but I thought Golden was better then. So I'm curious if you could elaborate further on that take.
All right. You're not dropping either guy into coverage because that'd be stupid. You aren't, because neither guy can cover. Shane Ray doesn't really play the run well. He just has a good motor. Shane Ray doesn't really rush the passer well. He just has a good motor. Marcus Golden, on the other hand, rushes the passer, has better jump off the ball, understands how to use his hands. He's not Ricky Bobbying it out there. He knows exactly what he's doing. He rushes the passer effectively. It's great to watch. And then he's got a perfect inside move. Now Ray does have some decent moves. He understands how to get around the tackle. But when you're facing slower, plodding SEC tackles, because outside of Alabama, not a single tackle in the SEC is going to be known for their pass blocking. Even Georgia's left tackle, well, actually, Georgia's left tackle is pretty damn good too. Theus, he'll be a first or second round pick next year. But outside of those two guys, there's not a lot of good left tackles in the SEC. And Theus shut him down.
Okay. I think you're sleeping a little bit on DJ Humphries, but your point still works.
I don't think Humphries is this great prospect that he's being puffed up to be. He's got talent, but he hasn't shown it yet. Although a lot of that could just be Florida's offensive coaches were inept last year.
That's pretty fair. I think you could say that.
I mean, it's fair to say it's probably why the whole staff got fired.
Yeah, I think that's what. All right. Yeah, I saw you tweet that to somebody, and I know people who sort of can say hot takes and whatnot, but just thought you deserve the platform to elaborate further. So
he's just better. I mean, Ray's got a slightly higher potential. Like Ray could be a Croy Bierman type 5 to 7 sack rotational guy, where Golden's more of that 3 to 4 sack base end. But you're talking rotational guys with both of them.
Yeah. So circling back a little bit to some of the visits we had the last 2 days, two names really stood out to me. David Johnson, the running back from Northern Iowa, and Justin Hardy, the wide receiver from ECU. Hardy stood out to me, namely because I looked him up and I said, oh, he had the best 3-cone of any wide receiver at the Combine. He had the second best 3-cone of any player at the Combine, regardless of position. He's definitely going to be on Thomas Dimitrov's radar. And, the difference between, say, Justin Hardy and, say, a guy like Kerry Meyer, who had a great 3-cone, I went back and watched a little tape of Justin Hardy the other night. And Justin Hardy is actually a good wide receiver, unlike Kerry Meyer, who was just kind of a decent athlete that had a great 3-cone and good catch, but that's about it. The play that Justin Hardy reminded me a lot of was Roddy White, but not sort of young Roddy and Roddy in his prime, but more the older Roddy, because Hardy's not really a speedster. He's not a guy that's going to take the top off the defense. So to me, I think Hardy could develop into that sort of 2013 Roddy, when Roddy came back from the injuries in the second half of that season, and be that sort of possession receiver. I think he's going to be a guy that's going to have to win like Roddy has done over the years, because he's such a great, crisp route runner. as opposed to a guy that just has great separation skills. But I could see, obviously with Roddy has shown that that sort of player can work pretty effectively across from Julio Jones. So it'll be interesting to see if the Falcons target Hardy in the third or fourth round, which is where I think he'll probably get drafted. Your thoughts on that, Scott?
Sounds about right.
Okay.
I mean, third or fourth round, I don't think the Falcons should take him, but I think him going in the third or fourth round makes sense. Now, David Johnson in the fourth round, if you're looking for your speedster, perfect zone fit kind of guy, that's your guy.
Yeah. That was my thoughts on David Johnson. I want a guy who's a little bit more of a bruiser, personally. But I can look at Johnson and say, okay, if the Falcons wind up drafting him, say in the fourth round, I get why they like him because he really does fit that sort of outside zone scheme. But I saw a little bit of him that I was like, okay, that play, I was like, okay, that reminded me a little bit of Arian Foster. They have similar size, similar speed and burst and quickness. I wouldn't say, he consistently reminded me of Arian Foster, but there was a couple of plays where I was like, okay, if you could get him to his max potential, he could be a poor man's Arian Foster. But the player that he compared athletically to that was a backup to Foster in Houston was Ben Tate. And so obviously Shanahan was in Cleveland last year. They signed Ben Tate. So it makes sense that if they're like, oh, he's Ben Tate, but not with injury issues like Ben Tate had, I can see why the Falcons would really like Johnson. So I think, it wouldn't shock me if we saw Hardy and Johnson be some version of their mid-round picks back-to-back. We'll see.
Yeah, that wouldn't shock me either. I do think that – well, actually, I will say Johnson on my speed score is the best running back in my top, 20? Outside of in my top 18 running backs, he's the biggest, strongest, fastest, most explosive back. And he's got the highest running back score out of all of them, too. Which, if you follow metrics, the running back speed score is one of the few metrics that I believe in. Outside of Carlos Williams, but Carlos Williams beat up his girlfriend, so I don't think Atlanta's looking at him.
Okay. That's probably safe to say.
I mean, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I like David Johnson a lot. I think he'd be very good in the system, and I think the Falcons should take a look at him.
Yeah, I personally want someone who's a little bit better at breaking tackles, but I can't really complain about David Johnson. He is a good fit in our scheme, and he can be a valuable asset on third down. So, eventually I can imagine a situation where he eventually grows into being the starter, and he's one of those guys that gets 1,000 yards and catches 40 or 50 passes a year. So, I think that's what you're looking at is upside.
I'll agree with that.
All right, Scott, you think it's time for us to hit this mailbag?
Yeah, we should.
All right. Some of these questions I think we've answered on previous shows, but I think we understand that not everybody watches us every week. So bear with us. Like this first one from Lord Holy Jesus. With safety being a need, who are some of the ideal prospects that the Falcons should and could target in the draft?
I've listed a couple of those on this show, but Darrell Eskridge, Quentin Rollins, just going off the top of my head here. Darrell Eskridge, Rollins. Let me look at my safeties real quick. Jaquiski Tart would be a fun one. Eric Rowe, Demarius Randall. Basically any of the guys that I rated high. Jaron Smith out of Fresno State. And Adrian Amos, if you're looking for a sleeper, him and Bobby McClain from Memphis would both be sleepers, both be very, very quick players who could make impacts.
Yeah, I'll stick with the same two names that I've named consistently. I think the last two or three shows. Scott named both of them, but Damaris Randall, Deron Smith. I've heard recent buzz that Randall might sneak into the first round, similar to Jimmy Ward last year, just because teams are like the safety class is terrible. So if we want a safety, we got to get him early. And I think that's one of the reasons why I think it's a good bet that the Falcons will use that 42nd pick on the safety. Um, I think those two guys sort of stand out in my mind, but the Falcons could definitely take somebody else. All right. At Villamatic_J asks, do you think the Falcons need help at inside linebacker? If so, which player would you like to see drafted?
I mean, personally, I think they could get away with having Paul Warlow there and letting Warlow have his third year, and whether it works out or not, I think you've got something there. I think you've got at least a talented depth guy. But I understand not everybody loves Paul Warlow in the Falcons fan base, and some of them think he sucks. But I think he's a decent player, and I think he's worth keeping. I think he's worth giving a shot to. But if you get a guy in the second round like Stephon Anthony falling right into your lap, take him. If you get Eric Kendricks there falling into your lap, take him. If you get Shaq Thompson falling to your lap right there, take him. But other than those three guys, I don't think you take a linebacker in the early rounds or until late rounds for depth. And even then, I don't even know if you need depth at linebacker. You got Marquise Sproul, you got Prince Shembo, you got Alan Bradford, Aaron's boy Nate Stupar. I mean, you got some decent talent on the bench.
Yeah, Stoops. I think Scott and I have argued about this frequently in the past month, so we won't go too in depth. He's higher on Warlow than I am. I'm not as down on Warlow as some people. I do think he played like crap last year, but I'm not willing to write him off. As far as guys that I would like to see, Scott basically named them. I think you look at some of those guys that are going to be drafted in the top 50 or so, like a Kendricks, like a Thompson, maybe an Anthony. And other than that, I haven't done a whole lot of homework on inside linebackers, but nobody else other than those guys really sort of stand out to me. The Falcons aren't going to draft Paul Dawson, so you can already I can throw that dream out the window or whatnot. So, I think Scott's right. You can probably get away with Warlow being the inside linebacker. You want to bring in somebody that he can push. But worst case scenario, you start Warlow there. If he struggles again, you do have Durant there. If Durant's injured, which is a possibility, Brooks Reed got some looks at inside linebacker in Houston. He could possibly play that position in a pinch. And of course, we got the great one, Nate Stupar, ready to slide in there and beast. So I think the Falcons are pretty good at inside linebacker. It's really just a matter of if a really good player is there later than where you were expecting him to be, then you take him. But other than that, you can probably wait till next year to really address it. Okay. At Mrs._Moss, Jenny, if you're nasty, she asks, do you think Todd Gurley will be on our roster?
No.
Yeah, I'm agree with Scott. No, I would like to see it, but I don't see it happening. It's too good of a running back class to get too caught up in the Gurley hype. It's well-deserved hype, but he's not going to be the last good running back to come into the league.
I mean, you don't touch a guy coming off his ACL at 8th overall, because you'd be the first team in NFL history to take a running back in the top 10 coming off an ACL surgery. And speaking with a couple of former personnel heads, there's no way that they would touch him that high. So, I mean, would I love to see him on the roster? Yes. Will it happen? Hell no. and it shouldn't.
Yeah, I think the only way that Gurley's a Falcon is basically if the Falcons are, for whatever reason, and fall in love with Todd Gurley and decide to trade up from 42 into the first round to get him, because he's going to be a first round pick. Everything I've heard says he's going to be one of those playoff teams, the Colts, the Patriots, the Ravens. They're going to take him, or the Cowboys. I don't know who, maybe even the Chargers. But somebody's going to take him. Somebody that doesn't necessarily need him to come in and play week 1 is going to draft him in the first round. And I don't see the Falcons. And if the Falcons move up from 42 to 25 or so or wherever to get Gurley, I haven't looked at the chart, but I know from past history with like the Mark Ingram trade up that the Saints did a couple of years ago, generally speaking, you got to give up a future first round pick to go up that high. So I don't think the Falcons are going to be in the market for that. So I don't see a possibility of that happening. So I'd like to see it, but I don't see it happening. All right. Good friend at Evan Birchfield. Even though it's very unlikely to happen, what's your thoughts on the article about Adrian Peterson Atlanta interest?
It's not happening. It's not. I mean, everybody's going to freak out and get all excited about Adrian Peterson, but there's no way that Atlanta, one, trades for a 31-year-old running back past his prime, coming off of a season where he didn't play a single down, didn't play past the first game, but might as well have not played a single down. It's not happening. Love Adrian Peterson. Love his career. Future Hall of Famer. Not a future Hall of Famer who will end up in Atlanta.
All fair points. I would love to see it happen. Because I do think Adrian, because of the fact that he didn't play last year, it means he's really like a 29-year-old running back because he didn't take the wear and tear that most 30-year-old running backs take. And he's Adrian Peterson. The fact that Dr. James Andrews, the world's foremost orthopedic surgeon on ACL repairs, basically said he had the cleanest knee he's ever seen. And I'm sure Dr. James Andrews has scoped thousands upon thousands of knees. Basically, Adrian Peterson is not a normal human being. So I do think there's probably a good possibility that you could see Adrian Peterson. He's probably not going to be the player he has been, but I do think there's a strong possibility that he probably is going to have 3 or 4 more really good years left in him before he's done. But Scott's right. It's not going to happen in Atlanta. The Vikings asking price is too high. I think it's, the rumors are, at least ESPN was reporting that they want a first-round pick in the starting corner. So basically, if that's true, then the Falcons would have to give up next year's first-round pick in Robert Alford, and that's too high a price to pay in a draft that is this deep at running back. You can get a good running back. You're not going to get Adrian Peterson, unless you think Gurley's going to be Peterson. But you can get a good running back for a 3rd or 4th-round pick or a 5th-round pick or whatever, and it's just not worth it.
They want more for Adrian Peterson than what the Washington Redskins gave up for Clinton Portis in 2006.
Yeah.
Back when running backs mattered and were worth 2nd-round picks. And it wasn't about the system and the offensive line.
Yeah. I think the reason why they want that high price because they know no one's going to meet it. I think the Cowboys are really the only team that could afford to give it up just because they could like, hey, we'll give you Brandon Carr and our 26th overall pick, which is like basically just, nothing. But, I think basically the Vikings no one's going to pay that price because they want to keep Peterson because they know if they got a shot at making the playoffs, they need Adrian Peterson on the roster. So, yeah, I don't see it happening. So we can look forward to that game later this season. Adrian Peterson in the Dome, folks, live and in person.
Or he's just going to hold out and not play all year, which, again, I'm okay with that too.
Yeah, I'm sure Paul Warlow will thank him for that. So
I'm sure any team, anybody that the Falcons play, or any time you don't have to play Adrian Peterson, you're happy, no matter who's on the Falcons defense. Warlow would be happy, but so would the entire Falcons defense. Rashid Hageman would be happy that he wouldn't have to play Adrian Peterson.
Absolutely. All right. All right, Evan, I think we answered your second question. You asked for a prediction. I think we gave those. So we'll move on to at DLagPrez question. Should we rest our starters in week 17 or not? So clearly he's already putting us in the playoffs. So I guess this is – should we rest against the Saints, Scott?
I'm against resting starters, period.
Okay.
The fact that it's the Saints in week 17, even if the Falcons are 15-0 and the Saints are 0-15, I'm going to put the starters in for at least half the game. And if the Falcons are up 42-0, that's when you pull the starters. Outside of that, you don't pull starters. Ever.
I'm with you on that, Scott. Especially if you have a bye the first week of the playoffs, you can't rest your starters that last game. The Colts did it for years and years, and they were always one and done. Pretty much every year they did it. And then like the 1 year they were a wild card team, they won the Super Bowl. It was like, oh, that momentum, you need that. The Packers did it the year after they won the Super Bowl when they were like 15-1, and then the Giants beat them. So I think it's a bad plan. I agree with Scott. You play the guys. If you're up a certain level, if the outcome of the game is decidedly in one team's favor, win or loss, then you pull your guys. Like a couple of years back, the Falcons should have pulled John Abraham at halftime instead of playing him through the third quarter where he got hurt against the Bucks in 2012. That was a mistake, but playing him to begin with wasn't a mistake. It was they kept him in the game too long and then he got hurt. So, the Falcons weren't going to win that game. It was pretty clear early in that game the Falcons weren't ready to play that game. So I'm with Scott on this. I don't believe in resting your starters. And so especially against the Saints, especially if it's a sweep possibility, no, you don't rest them. Sweep them.
Coaches who want to get fired rest their starters.
Well, there you go.
Which is why Mike Smith used to do it.
All right. At Common Thought asked, if the Falcons decide to double dip on pass rushers, which guys would be worth it in rounds 3 through 5?
Haloi Kikaha, Ryan Dallaire, Danielle Hunter, Marcus Golden, Nate Orchard, Max Vales, Zach Hodges, Anthony Chiquillo, Davis Tull, Lorenzo Malden, Zach Wegman. Let's see. No, I'm missing one. There's a bunch that, you could go, and I've got 20 pass rushers with top 100 grades. I've got 30 with top 150 grades. You've got a ridiculous pass rushing class this year. Martin Affetti out of Memphis, Sage Harrell out of James Madison, ridiculous athlete. Ryan Russell out of Purdue, Jamari Arasco, Marcus Rush out of Michigan State. Again, I could go on all day with how good this class is. You're going to have multiple starters, multiple first-round picks, there's probably at least probably 300 sacks are going to come out of this year's class. Career. At least, if not more. There's going to be a lot of quarterbacks clenching their ribs and going, oh my God, I'm hurting because of this year's edge rusher class.
Okay. All right. I haven't done as much homework as Scott has, but I think if you're double dipping, you're doing it because you got your Leo in round 1 and you want to get that base defensive end on the opposite side. Of the guys I think could be there in rounds 3 to 5 that immediately stand out to me, Diggy, if people are concerned about his hips. I don't think Preston Smith is going to be there. Chicolo, I think, could be that guy. Most of the other guys I'm looking at, like, I don't know if Zadarius Smith is that guy. I don't know if Trey Flowers is that guy. But
Zadarius Smith is more of that Malachi Goodman type.
Yeah. So I haven't done a whole lot of homework. Like I'm looking at names like I don't even know who that dude is. But maybe Shaq Riddick. Throw him out there because I know he's a force player. So why not? So is Marcus Rush. So why not? But yeah, there you go.
Gotta love Justice and his force players.
Yeah. Shout out to Justice. All right. That's it, Scott. That's our last mailbag question. We did a show in 65 minutes. So
wow. That's a first.
Yeah. I don't think we've done that since we first started the show.
Oh man. I think it's because it's the calm before the storm. At this point, people are tired of hearing the same thoughts about the draft. So I'm going to try and see if I can get Charles back on for next week.
Okay.
I think that'll be fun. We'll go over a draft preview show. For our final predictions, we'll do our final mock drafts for the Falcons. And then we'll go into the draft and we'll all have some fun watching it. The best part of the draft is after the draft, once it's over. Because I get to sleep for 3 straight weeks. I don't watch any film. I don't do any tape study. I don't even come up with a watch list. I do my couple of articles for Bleacher Report, and that's it. So I enjoy it. It's my nice little mini vacation.
Good luck to you, Scott. Because I haven't really watched a whole lot of film, and that's when I start watching film. So, yeah, we are the opposite. So I won't be sleeping. You will be sleeping. So
I'll be playing video games. I'll be hitting up that new Mortal Kombat for once.
All right. Good over here. So people, you can find Scott on Twitter at Scott Karasik. You can find me on Twitter at FalcFans. Hit up the show at Falcons PFC. Hit up our boss at PF Central. I don't know what to call him. Producer, I guess. Whatever he still is, his title. Yeah. Basically, complain to him when it doesn't show up on the iTunes feed, but I think we've gotten that issue resolved, so that shouldn't be a problem anymore, I think. Use the hashtag Falcons mailbag. That's the easiest way for you to get your questions in. Send them in whenever, but we enjoy it when you send them in last minute, as people want to do. And that's the show. So we will talk next week about the draft.